Oh, my sweet girl.
Nobody noticed Imani at the Kong Estate Gala. In a room dripping with diamonds and the sharp scent of cold power, she was a shadow in a white apron. No name, no history, just a pair of steady hands offering champagne to men who looked right through her. But the smallest person in the room saw her. Yuna, the Mafia princess, a child who hadn't uttered a sound in 2 years, broke the silence of the elite. She didn't whisper. She didn't cry. She reached out, gripped Imani's hand, and called her Mom. In that heartbeat, the music stopped, and 1,000 eyes turned toward the woman the world had forgotten. Imani had come to Seoul to disappear, but she had just become the most dangerous woman in the city. If you've ever tried to build a wall around your heart, only for a child to find the one loose stone, welcome. Subscribe and stay with us, because this story isn't about a job. It's about a survival that looks like love. Imani hadn't come to Seoul for a family. She had come for a paycheck and a place where her own name wouldn't ring with the echoes of a sister she couldn't save. She was a professional ghost, a ghost who specialized in being invisible in the homes of the wealthy. She was better at staying quiet than most people were at talking, and she had every intention of leaving the Kong estate exactly as she found it, cold, quiet, and profitable. The gala was supposed to be her final night of invisibility. It was a sea of charcoal suits that cost more than Imani's apartment, and conversations that felt like business negotiations. Imani stood in her corner, her natural habitat, accepting the empty flutes of the elite and settling in to be a silent observer of a world she didn't belong to. That was when she felt the tug, not a polite pull, but the desperate, grounding grip of a child who had finally found home in a stranger's eyes. Before we continue, 6 weeks before the gala lights dazzled her eyes, Imani sat in a small apartment in Chicago, surrounded by cardboard boxes and silence. Her life was a puzzle with missing pieces. The business she had worked so hard to build had collapsed, leaving her with empty pockets and a heavy heart. But it wasn't the money that kept her awake at night. It was Maya. 3 years had passed since the car accident, but for Imani, time had stood still. Maya was only 15 when she died, a girl with big dreams and a laugh that could fill a room. Imani had raised her alone after their mother walked out, playing the role of both sister and parent. The guilt was a shadow that followed her everywhere. On the night of the crash, Imani had been at work, pushing through an extra shift. She told herself she was doing it for Maya's future, but the truth felt like a punch to the gut. She wasn't there when her sister needed her most. When the offer came for a living position in Seoul, Imani didn't hesitate. Her family in Chicago only looked at her with pity or blame, and the streets of her neighborhood were too full of ghosts. She needed a place where the air didn't taste like regret. "I need to be somewhere that doesn't remember me," she whispered to the empty walls. She wanted to go where her face was just another face in the crowd, and where her past was a language nobody spoke. Arrival in Seoul was a blur of neon signs and sounds she couldn't understand. The city was fast and loud, but the Khan estate was the opposite. It sat on a hill, a massive structure of black stone and glass that looked more like a fortress than a home. It was beautiful, but it was cold. Her first glimpse of Kong Min-jae happened in the high-ceilinged foyer. He walked with quiet, predatory grace, his suit as sharp as his jawline. He didn't look like a man who felt things. He looked like a man who decided them. His eyes were dark and steady, offering no welcome. He was terrifying in a way that made the air feel thin. Then there was Yuna. The 5-year-old stood beside a large marble pillar, her small hands folded neatly. She didn't have the bounciness of a child. Her eyes were wide and haunted, carrying a weight that made her seem like she was 50 years old instead of 5. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink when Imani walked in. She was just a small, silent statue in a very large, very lonely house. Mrs. Cho, the head housekeeper, led Imani through the long, echoing corridors. Her face was a mask of professional calmness. "The rules here are simple," Mrs. Cho said, her voice clipping every word. "You are to keep the house perfect. You are not to engage with the family beyond basic care. Mr. Kong prefers minimal attachment." Imani looked at the polished floors and the distant, cold man in the study. She thought of her own shattered heart and the sister she couldn't save. "Good," she thought, her face remaining neutral. "So do I." She finally reached her new room. It was small and plain, tucked away in the staff wing. As she set her single suitcase on the bed, she took a deep breath. She would be a ghost here. She would stay invisible, stay safe, and above all, stay numb. She had come to Seoul to disappear. And in this house of shadows, she felt she had finally found the perfect place to hide. During her first week, Imani moved to the Kong estate like a shadow. She watched everything. The house was a machine that ran on rules and silence. Little Yuna was the quietest part of it all. The girl ate her meals without making a sound, her eyes fixed on her plate. At night, she went to her room alone. She never smiled, and she never asked for anything. The other staff members were efficient but cold. They walked past the child as if she were a piece of furniture, avoiding any eye contact that might lead to a conversation. Min Jae was even more distant. On the rare occasions he saw his daughter, he spoke to her like a business associate. "Have you finished your lessons?" he would ask, his voice low and formal. He didn't offer hugs or playful hair tousles. He provided everything she needed, clothes, food, a roof, but he didn't provide himself. Imani watched in the corners, her heart aching with a familiarity she tried to ignore. The change happened during the second week. It was late, and the rest of the house was asleep. Imani was finishing a late shift in the laundry room when she heard it. It was a soft, muffled sound coming from the upper floor. Crying. It wasn't a loud, demanding cry of a spoiled child. It was a broken, hopeless sound of someone who didn't expect anyone to come. Imani stood in the hallway, remembering Mrs. Cho's warning about minimal attachment. She knew she should keep walking, but the sound pulled at the strings of her heart that she thought she had cut long ago, breaking protocol. She climbed the stairs and pushed open the heavy door to Yuna's room. The room was vast and dark. Yuna was sitting in the middle of her oversized bed, her knees tucked to her chest. Her tears were silent, rolling down her cheeks in the moonlight. Imani walked closer, her footsteps soft on the thick rug. She didn't try to pick the girl up or offer empty words. She simply stopped at the edge of the bed. "Can I sit with you?" Imani asked softly. Yuna looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. For a long moment, she just stared. Then, slowly, she gave a single, small nod. Imani sat down. She didn't ask questions about why the girl was sad. She just sat there, being a presence in the dark. After a while, Imani began to speak in a low, rhythmic voice. She told a story she used to tell Maya, about a brave princess who lived in a tower and a friendly dragon who taught her how to fly. As the story went on, Yuna's breathing slowed. Eventually, the girl leaned her head against Imani's arm. She fell asleep holding Imani's hand, her small fingers gripped tight. Over the next few weeks, the bond grew in the shadows. Every night, Imani would sneak into Yuna's room to read. During the day, they found small moments. Imani showed Yuna how to braid hair, and the girl was fascinated by the texture of Imani's curls. For the first time, small smiles began to flicker on Yuna's face. The girl started following Imani through the house, staying just a few steps behind like a little duckling. Mrs. Cho noticed. She stopped Imani in the kitchen one morning, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Kong won't like this attachment, Imani," she warned. "Be careful." "I'm just being kind, Mrs. Cho," Imani replied, keeping her voice steady. "That's my job." But as Imani watched Yuna wave at her from across the garden later that day, she knew she was lying. She wasn't just being kind. She was falling in love with this lonely child. The peace was broken when the official invitations arrived. There was to be a grand gala at the estate. All staff were required to serve the elite guests. As Imani looked at the guest list, her stomach dropped. Yuna would be there, dressed in silk and lace, forced back into the cold light of her father's world. And Imani would have to watch from the shadows, pretending they were strangers. The night of the gala, the calm estate did not look like a home. It looked like a palace of gold and glass. Thousands of lights hung from the ceilings like frozen stars. Men in black suits and women in dresses that cost more than a house filled the rooms. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of many people talking at once. Imani moved through the crowd in her crisp black and white uniform, carrying a tray of champagne. She was back to being a ghost, a silent server who kept the glasses full and the floors clean. From the edge of the room, she watched Min Jae. He was in the center of it all, looking powerful and cold. He stood tall in a deep black suit, surrounded by men who looked at him with a mix of respect and fear. He nodded occasionally, but he never smiled. He was the master of this world, and he seemed to belong exactly where he was, at the top. Then Imani's eyes found Yuna. The little girl sat at a small table near the edge of the ballroom. She was dressed like a princess in a cream-colored dress with a soft sweater. Her hair was perfectly straight, with neat bangs framing her face. She looked beautiful, but she also looked lost. While the adults laughed and drank, Yuna sat perfectly still, her feet dangling above the floor. She was surveying the room with her usual silent gaze, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Imani was busy refilling a guest glass when she heard it. The sound of small, quick feet running across the marble floor. Before she could turn around, two small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. A small head pressed hard into her white apron. Imani froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't need to look down to know who it was. The ballroom was noisy one second, and the next, it was deathly quiet. In that silence, Yuna's voice rang out, clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. Mom. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Every conversation stopped. Guests turned their heads, their eyes wide with shock. They looked at the black maid in the center of the room, then at the child clinging to her, and then at the man at the center of the ballroom. Imani felt the heat of 100 stares. She saw Mrs. Cho in the distance, her face pale and horrified. Imani's own hands hovered in the air, trembling. She wanted to hug Yuna back, but she was terrified of what it would mean. Across the ballroom, Min Jae stood like a statue. The cold mask he always wore seemed to crack. For the first time, Imani saw real confusion and shock in his eyes. The silence stretched until it felt like it would break. Then Min Jae began to move. The crowd parted for him as if he were a king. He walked slowly, his eyes locked on Imani and the child. He stopped just a few feet away, his shadow falling over them. Yuna, he said, his voice low and dangerously controlled. Let go. Instead of letting go, Yuna's grip tightened. She buried her face deeper into Imani's apron, refusing to move. Imani looked up, her eyes meeting Min Jae's. There was a cold fire in his gaze that made her breath catch in her throat. He didn't say anything else to the guests. He only looked at Imani with an intensity that felt like a promise. My office, he whispered, so only she could hear. After the gala, Mrs. Cho hurried forward then, gently but firmly pulling Yuna away. As the child was let out of the room, Imani stood alone in the center of the staring crowd. She smoothed her apron with shaking hands, knowing that her life and soul had just changed forever. The invisible girl was gone. Everyone was watching her now. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the golden lights of the gala had been dimmed, leaving the Kong estate in a heavy, watchful silence. Imani stood outside the heavy wooden doors of Min Jae's office, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she was finally summoned inside, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the dark city. He was still wearing his expensive suit, but his tie was loose and his top button was undone. It was the first time she had seen a crack in his perfect iron armor. He turned around slowly, his eyes as sharp as a blade. Explain, he said. The word was short and cold, echoing off the walls. Imani gripped the fabric of her uniform. I don't know what you want me to say, sir, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Min Jae stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. My daughter has not spoken in public in 2 years, he said, his voice rising with an intensity that made Imani want to shrink. Tonight, she crossed a room full of the most powerful people in Seoul and called you, a woman she has known for only 6 weeks, Mom. Explain. Every detail. What have you been doing with her? He demanded. I read to her, Imani answered, looking him in the eye despite her fear. At night, when she couldn't sleep, I sat with her. Min Jae's jaw tightened. You were told the rules. You were told not to engage beyond basic care. You were told I prefer minimal attachment. She was crying. Imani burst out, unable to stop herself. She was alone in that big room, and she was crying. I couldn't just... She stopped, her breath coming in short gasps. Min Jae went quiet, a strange look passing over his face. He sat behind his desk and leaned back. Yuna's mother died 2 years ago, he said quietly. It was a heart condition. It was sudden. Yuna was with her when it happened. He looked down at his hands. Since that day, she stopped speaking to anyone except in whispers. She never called anyone by name. She never said that word again. Not once. Until tonight. The silence in the room was heavy with the weight of that truth. Imani felt a pang of deep sadness for the little girl. But Min Jae's face hardened again. Whatever this is, it stops now, he said firmly. You will maintain professional distance. No more bedtime stories. No more hand-holding. My daughter cannot become attached to someone who will eventually leave. Imani felt a spark of anger. And if she is already attached? She asked. Min Jae looked at her coldly. Then you will help her unattach. As Imani turned to leave the office, his voice stopped her one last time. Why did you do it? He asked, sounding almost human for a second. Why break the rules for a child you don't even know? Imani paused at the door. She thought of Maya and the night she wasn't there to hold her. Because I know what it's like to lose someone, she said honestly. And I know what it's like to have no one hold you while you cry. Their eyes met in the dim light. In that moment, there was a flash of recognition and understanding between them, but it felt dangerous, like a spark near a trail of gunpowder. Imani left the room and walked back to her small bed. She knew she had a choice to make. She could obey the boss and break a child's heart, or she could protect Yuna. As she stared at the ceiling, she knew she had already chosen. She wasn't going to let Yuna be alone again. The morning after the gala, the warmth in the house died. Mrs. Cho met Imani in the hallway with a face like stone. She delivered the new rules with a voice that didn't shake. Imani was reassigned to the deep kitchen and the steaming laundry rooms in the basement. A new, older nanny was brought in to handle Yuna's care. The orders from Mr. Kong were absolute. There was to be no interaction between Imani and the child beyond passing each other in the halls. The first week of separation was a slow torture. From the kitchen doorway, Imani watched Yuna at the long dining table. Every time the door creaked, the little girl's head would snap up, her eyes searching for a familiar face. When she saw Imani, her eyes would fill with a desperate light. But Imani had to look away and keep walking. Yuna stopped eating. She pushed her food around the plate, her face growing pale. At night, the house was silent because Yuna had stopped crying. She had simply gone back into her shell. By the second week, Yuna's regression deepened into something scary. She stopped smiling entirely. She wouldn't play with her toys, and she refused to speak, even in whispers, to the new nanny. She was like a ghost haunting her own home. Mrs. Cho's professional mask began to slip. She reported to Min Jae that the child was getting worse, not better. Imani ran into Min Jae in the hallway near the study. He looked tired, his eyes dark with stress. He stopped for a second, looking at Imani's laundry basket. This is temporary, he said, his voice sounding like he was trying to convince himself. She is a child. She will adjust. Imani looked him right in the eye, the fear of losing her job gone. Will she asked, her voice steady and sharp. Or will she just learn that the people she loves always leave? The words landed like a knife. Min Jae flinched, his jaw tightening as he turned away without another word. That night, Imani couldn't take it anymore. She sat in her small room, but all she could see was Yuna's empty, haunted eyes. She knew she was breaking every rule in the house, but she also knew she couldn't watch a child suffer just to keep her own life simple. At midnight, she crept up the back stairs, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed open the bedroom door and found Yuna awake. The girl was lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling with eyes that looked far too old. I'm here, baby, Imani whispered, moving to the side of the bed. Yuna didn't move at first. Then she turned her head slowly. Her lower lip trembled. You left me, she said. The voice was tiny, cracked, and full of pain. Imani's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She climbed onto bed and pulled the small girl into her arms. I know. I'm sorry, she whispered into Yuna's hair. I'm here now. I'm right here. Yuna didn't just cry. She sobbed, her small body shaking against Imani's chest. She held onto Imani's uniform so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eventually, The exhaustion took over, and Yuna fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Imani stayed right there, her own eyes closing as she leaned back against the pillows. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the door creaked open. Min-jae stepped into the room to check on his daughter. He stopped in his tracks, his breath catching. There, in the dim glow of the nightlight, he saw his daughter sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 weeks, wrapped safely in Imani's arms. He stood in the silence, watching them, the anger he expected to feel replaced by a strange, heavy ache in his chest. Min-jae stood in the doorway of his daughter's room, his hand frozen on the handle. He should have been furious. Imani had disobeyed a direct order from the head of the city's most powerful syndicate. She had broken the barrier he had spent 2 years building. But as the moonlight spilled over the bed, his anger vanished. All he could see was Yuna. Her face was relaxed, the deep lines of worry gone. There were no fresh tear tracks on her cheeks. Imani's arm was wrapped around the girl protectively, even in her sleep. He didn't wake them. He couldn't. Something inside his chest, something he kept tightly locked away, began to crack. He stood there for a long time, watching them breathe in sync. He realized that this woman, a stranger from across the ocean, was giving his daughter the very thing he was too afraid to offer. She was giving her a reason to feel safe. The sun was just beginning to peek over the Seoul skyline when Imani tried to sneak out of the room. She was startled to find Min-jae waiting for her in the quiet hallway. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his hair was slightly messy. "We need to talk," he said. His voice wasn't cold this time. It was just tired. He led her out to the private garden. The morning air was crisp and still, the city below just starting to wake up. They stood by a stone bench, surrounded by the scent of pine and dew. Min-jae looked out at the horizon for a long moment before he spoke. "I'm failing her," he admitted. The confession seemed to drain the strength from his shoulders. "I've been failing her since her mother died. I thought if I kept everything controlled and kept everyone at a distance, I could protect her from more pain. But I was wrong. I wasn't protecting her. I was only making her feel more alone." Imani felt a lump in her throat. She looked at her hands, thinking of the life she had left behind. "I had a sister," she said softly. "Maya. She was 15 when a car accident took her. I raised her like she was my own. And when I lost her, I swore I'd never let myself love like that again. I thought if I felt nothing, I could never be destroyed again." In the quiet of the garden, the truth sat between them. They were both running from the same ghost. Min-jae tried to survive by controlling every person and every room he entered. Imani tried to survive by being a ghost herself, hiding in the shadows of other people's lives. But Yuna was breaking through both of their defenses. Min-jae turned to her. For the first time, he didn't look like a boss. He looked like a father who was lost. "What do I do?" he asked. It wasn't a command. It was a real question. "Let her love who she chooses," Imani replied, "even if it's terrifying to watch." Min-jae stepped closer. "And if she chooses you?" The weight of the question hung in the air. Imani didn't hesitate. "Then I stay." A shift happened then. Min-jae didn't order her back to the kitchen. He didn't tell her to get to work. Instead, he asked, "Will you stay?" Not as a maid, as the person who reads to her at night, the person she calls for. Imani looked at the massive house, then back at him. "I need to think about it," she said. But as she saw the relief in his eyes, she knew her heart had already said yes. They walked back inside. A tentative truce formed between them. Imani was allowed to care for Yuna again, but the lines between being staff and being family were now blurred and dangerous. The next 2 weeks were a time of peace that the Kong estate had never known. Imani no longer hid in the laundry room or ducked into the kitchen when she heard footsteps. She cared for Yuna openly. The sound of laughter, once a stranger to these halls, began to return. Every afternoon, they sat in the sun-drenched garden where Imani braided Yuna's hair, and every evening ended with a story. Min-jae watched them from a distance. He was still a man of few words, but the hardness in his eyes was melting. One night, he did something that surprised them both. During story time, he stepped into a room and sat at the edge of the bed. He didn't say anything, but he listened as Imani described a kingdom in the clouds. When Yuna finally drifted off, She was holding Imani's hand with her left and Min Jae's with her right. Neither adult spoke about it. But the air in the room felt different, heavier, but in a way that made them feel anchored. But while the house grew warm, the world outside was turning cold. A rival faction had been watching the estate, waiting for a crack in Min Jae's armor. One of his business partners had betrayed him, and a plan was set in motion to strike at the heart of his power. The night it happened was dark and moonless. Imani was in the middle of a story about a brave knight when the peace was shattered. First came the sound of tires screeching on the driveway, then a loud crash. Suddenly, gunshots rang out, followed by the terrifying sound of glass breaking downstairs. The estate's high-tech security had been breached. Imani didn't freeze. She didn't wait for orders. She went into protection mode instantly. She grabbed Yuna, who was wide awake and shaking with fear, and pulled her toward the hidden panic room Min Jae had shown her during her first week. They scrambled inside just as heavy boots pounded down the hallway. Imani barricaded the door and pulled Yuna into her lap in the corner of the small metal room. "I've got you, baby," Imani whispered, her voice fierce even as her own heart raced. "I've got you. I won't let anyone hurt you. You're safe with me. I promise." Outside, the house was a war zone. Min Jae was fighting like a man possessed, but he wasn't thinking about his territory or his money. He was panicked, searching every room for his daughter. When he saw her bedroom door kicked in and the room empty, his heart nearly stopped. Then he saw the hidden door to the panic room was sealed from the inside. He realized Imani had her. When the fight was finally over and the estate was secured, Min Jae rushed to the panic room and punched in the code. The door hissed open. He found Imani sitting on the floor, her face streaked with tears but her eyes burning with protective fire. Yuna had cried herself to sleep in her arms. "Is it over?" Imani asked, her voice trembling. "It's over," Min Jae breathed, sinking to his knees in front of them. He looked at Imani, this woman who hadn't run for the exit, but had run toward his child. He realized she truly loved Yuna. "Thank you," he said quietly. Imani looked at him, her grip on the child tightening. "You don't have to thank me for loving her," she said. The word hung in the air, honest and final. Min Jae looked at them both, and for the first time, he saw clearly. "I was wrong," he whispered, "about everything. You're not taking her from me. Imani, you're giving her back to me." He sat there with them in the small room, looking at Imani as if he were seeing her for the very first time. The day after the attack, the Kong estate felt different. Workers moved quickly to fix broken glass and repair the walls. The air was thick with the smell of fresh paint and nervous energy. Security guards in dark suits stood at every corner, their eyes scanning the grounds. Amidst the chaos, Yuna refused to leave Imani's side. She held on to Imani's hand as they walked through the house, her small fingers never letting go. Min Jae called a meeting for all the staff in the main hall. He stood at the front, looking tired but more determined than ever. He spoke about the new security rules, but then his voice changed. It became softer, yet very serious. "There is one more change," he said, his eyes finding Imani in the crowd. "Ms. Imani will no longer be serving as household staff. From today, she will be serving as Yuna's primary guardian." The room went silent. Then the whispers started. The other maids and guards stared at Imani with shock and judgment. Imani felt her face grow hot. She looked at Min Jae, her mouth open in surprise. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't even mentioned this to her. Later that afternoon, he called her into his office. He sat behind his desk, but for the first time, he didn't look like a boss. "I should have asked you first," he said quietly. "Yes," Imani replied, her voice shaky. "You definitely should have." He stood up and walked around the desk. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be vulnerable. But I'm asking you now, don't stay as staff. Stay as family. Yuna needs you, and I need you to be here." Imani shook her head, her heart racing. "I'm the maid, Min Jae. That's what everyone will see. Your world is traditional. They won't accept a black woman raising a Korean child. The gossip and the judgment will follow Yuna her whole life. What if I'm not enough for her?" Min Jae stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Do you think I care what they say?" Their opinions don't matter more than my daughter's happiness. Let them talk. Yuna chose you, and that is all that matters. As for not being enough, you're the only person who has been enough since her mother died." He paused, struggling with his words. "I'm not just asking for Yuna. When I thought you were hurt last night, I couldn't breathe. Seeing you with her makes me think I can heal, too. I don't know how to do this, Imani, but I want to learn." Imani felt tears stinging her eyes. "I came here to disappear," she whispered. "I was running away from grief, and instead I found this. But what if I lose you both? What if something happens and I have to survive losing people I love all over again?" Min Jae reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "What if nothing happens?" he asked softly. "What if we just get to be a family? What if you finally get to be happy?" At those words, Imani finally let go. She began to cry, the heavy weight of her past finally starting to break. She hadn't said yes yet, but as she looked at him, she knew the door to her heart was finally open. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was seen. That evening, the estate was quiet, but the silence no longer felt heavy. Imani sat on the edge of Yuna's bed. The nightlight threw soft shadows against the walls. Usually, this was a time for stories about dragons and brave knights, but tonight was different. Yuna was wide awake, her dark eyes watching Imani with a steady, knowing gaze. She seemed to know that a big decision was hanging in the air. Imani took a deep breath and smoothed the blanket. "Your dad asked me to stay," she said softly. "Not as a maid anymore. He wants me to stay as your guardian, as someone who takes care of you always." Yuna sat up, her small face serious. "As my mom," she said. The words were simple, but they made Imani's breath catch in her throat. It was the first time Yuna had said it directly to her, without the chaos of a ballroom or the fear of an attack. It was a quiet, honest statement. "Baby," Imani whispered, her heart aching. "I can't replace your mom. I would never try to do that." Yuna reached out and touched Imani's hand. "I know," the little girl said, her voice stronger than it had been weeks ago. "I remember her. I love her. But she is gone, and you are here, and I want you to stay." The room felt very small and very still. Yuna looked at her with a look that was both hopeful and demanding. "Will you?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it felt devastating. It was the final piece of the puzzle Imani had been trying to solve since she arrived in Seoul. Imani looked at the child who had broken through her walls. She thought of her sister Maya and the grief she had been running from. She thought of the cold boss who was learning how to be a father. Most of all, she thought of the girl who had called her mom when the whole world was watching. "I'm scared," Imani admitted, her voice cracking. Yuna gave a small, brave smile. "Me too," she said. "But you told me brave people are scared and they do it anyway." Imani let out a short laugh through her tears. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yeah," she said softly. "I did say that, didn't I?" She realized she couldn't keep running. She couldn't disappear anymore because she had finally been found. "Okay," Imani said, her voice turning firm. "Yes, I'll stay." Yuna's eyes lit up like stars. "Promise?" "I promise." Yuna didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around Imani's neck and hugged her with all her strength. "I love you, Mom," she whispered into Imani's shoulder. Imani closed her eyes and held the girl close, feeling the warmth of a life she never thought she would have again. "I love you too, sweetheart," she replied. A slight movement at the door made Imani look up. Min Jae was standing in the doorway. He had been there long enough to hear the whole thing. He didn't say a word, and he didn't need to. He simply looked at Imani over his daughter's head, his expression full of the soft, quiet peace that replaced his usual cold stare. In that look, Imani saw their future. 3 months later, the Khan estate was no longer a house of shadows. It was a home where the doors stayed open, and the garden was filled with laughter. Imani no longer wore a white apron, but she still walked the halls with protective heart, this time as the woman who had finally stopped disappearing.